What happens when a late-night host pushes back against royal privilege and refuses to play nice with one of the most controversial figures in modern celebrity culture? In just 36 seconds, a single comment would turn a routine interview into television chaos and expose the shocking truth about what really happens when entitlement meets accountability. Greg Gutfeld sat behind his desk that evening, ready for what he thought would be a standard interview. The studio audience buzzed with anticipation as Prince Harry walked onto the set. The applause was polite but measured. Something about the energy felt different from the start. "Thanks for having me," Harry said as he settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket with an air of casual superiority. "Well, we're glad you could make time for us," Greg replied with his signature smirk, the kind that signals he's not here to throw softballs. The first few minutes went smoothly enough. They talked about Harry's latest projects, his life in California, the usual surface-level material. But Greg had other plans. He wasn't interested in the rehearsed talking points. "So, let me ask you something." Greg leaned forward, his tone shifting from cordial to curious. "You've spent years now criticizing the institution you were born into, the family that gave you everything, and yet you still use the title. How does that work exactly?" The audience went quiet. Harry's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "I think that's a bit of an oversimplification, Greg," Harry said, his voice tight. "You don't understand the complexities of what I've been through." "Help me understand then," Greg pressed, "because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you want all the benefits of being a prince without any of the responsibilities. You want the platform, the attention, the special treatment, but none of the duty that comes with it." Harry shifted in his seat, his jaw clenching. "That's not fair. I've been very open about my struggles, about the trauma I've experienced, the media, the pressure, the lack of privacy. You have no idea what it's like." "You're right, I don't," Greg nodded. "But I also didn't choose to go on television every other week to complain about how hard my life is while living in a mansion. Most people deal with their problems privately, with a therapist. Not with a Netflix deal." The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and nervous laughter. Harry's face began to redden. "This is exactly the kind of dismissive attitude that makes it impossible to have real conversations about mental health," Harry shot back, his voice rising slightly. "You're trivializing genuine pain." "I'm not trivializing anything," Greg countered calmly. "I'm asking why you think your pain is more important than everyone else's. Why you deserve special treatment. Millions of people have trauma. They don't get book deals and speaking tours out of it. They just get up and go to work." "Because my situation is different," Harry insisted, leaning forward now, his composure cracking. "The level of scrutiny, the global attention, the family dynamics. It's not comparable to a normal person's life." "There it is," Greg said, pointing at Harry with a slight smile. "Normal person. You just said it yourself. You don't see yourself as a normal person, and you see yourself as above everyone else, even while you're pretending to be one of us." "That's not what I meant," Harry protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I think it's exactly what you meant," Greg continued. "And that's the problem. You want sympathy and understanding, but you also want everyone to remember that you're special. You can't have it both ways." Harry's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "You're twisting my words." "I'm repeating your words," Greg said. "Look, I get it. You had a tough childhood in some ways. Losing your mother was tragic. No one disputes that. But you're a grown man now. At some point, you have to stop blaming everyone else for your choices." "My choices?" Harry's voice cracked with indignation. "You think I chose any of this? I was born into a system that chewed me up and spit me out." "And yet you keep going back to it," Greg observed. "Every interview, every book chapter, every documentary. You can't stop talking about the institution you claim to hate. If you really wanted to move on, you'd actually move on. But you won't, because your entire identity is wrapped up in being the victim prince." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Harry stood up suddenly, his face flushed. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained anger. "You're right. You don't," Greg agreed, remaining seated and composed. "That's the beauty of free will. But you came here knowing what kind of show this is. Did you really think I was going to spend an hour nodding along while you complained about how hard it is to be wealthy and famous? This isn't about wealth," Harry snapped. "This is about basic human decency, something you clearly know nothing about." "Basic human decency," Greg repeated slowly. "That's rich coming from someone who's made millions airing his family's private business on the global stage. And you want to talk about decency? How decent is it to trash your father and brother in public while they can't defend themselves without looking petty?" "They can defend themselves," Harry retorted. "They have the entire British media machine behind them." "And you have the entire American media machine behind you," Greg shot back. "Oprah, Netflix, major publishers, talk shows falling over themselves to give you a platform. You're not the underdog here, Harry. You're just another celebrity who thinks criticism equals persecution." Harry took a step toward the desk, his finger pointing at Greg. "You don't know what you're talking about. You sit here in your comfortable studio, making jokes, judging people you've never met, situations you've never experienced. It's easy to be smug when you've never had real pressure." "Real pressure," Greg said, standing up now to match Harry's energy. "You mean like the pressure of building a career from nothing? Working your way up without a trust fund or a title?" "Yeah, you're right. I wouldn't know anything about that." "This is absurd," Harry muttered, shaking his head. "I came here in good faith." "No, you came here expecting a puff piece," Greg corrected him. "You expected me to ask softball questions and let you promote whatever you're selling this week. But that's not what happens on this show. Here, we have actual conversations. And sometimes those conversations get uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable?" Harry laughed bitterly. "This isn't uncomfortable. This is ambush journalism. This is exactly the kind of toxic media behavior that I've been speaking out against." "Asking tough questions is toxic now?" Greg raised his eyebrows. "Holding public figures accountable is an ambush. This is the problem with your whole worldview. You think any pushback is an attack. Any criticism is abuse. And you've surrounded yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear for so long that you can't handle a real conversation anymore." "I can handle plenty," Harry said through gritted teeth. "What I can't handle is sitting here while some second-rate commentator tries to make a name for himself by attacking me." The audience gasped audibly. Greg's expression didn't change, but there was a glint in his eye. "Second-rate," he repeated. "Well, this second-rate commentator has a show that people actually choose to watch. They're not watching because they feel obligated, or because I married into the right family. They're watching because they want to. Can you say the same about your projects?" "My projects speak for themselves," Harry said defensively. "Do they?" Greg tilted his head. "Because from what I've seen, they all say the same thing. Poor me. Look how much I've suffered. Please feel sorry for me while I count my money. It's getting old, Harry. The public is getting tired of it." "The public loves me," Harry insisted, but his voice wavered. "Some of the public feels sorry for you," Greg corrected. "That's not the same as love. And that sympathy is running out fast because people are starting to see through it. They're starting to realize that you're not interested in actually helping anyone or making a difference. You're interested in keeping yourself relevant, keeping the spotlight on you." "That's a lie," Harry said, his voice rising to a shout now. "Everything I do is about helping people, about making change." "Then why is it always about you?" Greg asked simply. "Every charity appearance, every speech, every interview. It all comes back to your story, your pain, your grievances. If you really cared about the causes, you'd let them be the focus. But you can't, because without your story, you're just another rich guy with opinions." Harry's hands balled into fists at his sides. "You have no right to question my motives." "I have every right," Greg said firmly. "You're a public figure who courts publicity. That means you get questioned. That means you get criticized. If you can't handle that, then maybe you should actually embrace the private life you claim to want so badly." "I want to help people understand," Harry said, his voice breaking slightly. "I want to use my experience to make things better for others." "Then stop making it about yourself," Greg said, his tone softening, just slightly. "If you really want to help, do the work quietly. Support the causes without needing a camera crew. Make a difference without needing applause. But you won't do that, will you? Because the attention is the point." "I'm done with this," Harry declared, pulling off his microphone and letting it drop to the floor. "This is exactly why I left that toxic environment in the first place. People like you, who think they can say whatever they want without consequences." "There's that word again," Greg noted. "Consequences. You mean like losing sponsorships? Like getting kicked off platforms? Like being silenced for having an opinion? Because that's what happens to regular people when the mob comes for them. But you'll be fine. You'll go back to your mansion, call your publicist, and spin this as another example of how persecuted you are." "You're a bully," Harry spat out. "Plain and simple. You hide behind humor and pretend it's just asking questions, but you're a bully." "And you're a hypocrite," Greg responded without missing a beat. "You lecture about compassion while showing none to your own family. You talk about privacy while selling every detail of your life. You preach about equality while clinging to your royal title. If calling that out makes me a bully, then I'll wear that badge proudly." Harry stared at him for a long moment, his chest heaving with angry breaths. The studio was so quiet you could hear the cameras humming. "I should never have come here," Harry finally said. "Probably not," Greg agreed. "But you did, and now everyone watching knows exactly who you are. Not the carefully crafted image your PR team creates, but the real you. The entitled, thin-skinned, self-absorbed person who can dish it out but can't take it. You're going to regret this," Harry warned, his voice low and threatening. "Is that a threat?" Greg asked, genuinely curious. "Are you threatening me on live television? Because that would be a new low, even for you." "It's not a threat," Harry backpedaled quickly. "It's a prediction. This kind of behavior catches up with people eventually." "I'll take my chances," Greg said with a shrug. "I sleep just fine at night, knowing I've never sold out my family for profit or played the victim while living in luxury. Can you say the same?" Harry didn't answer. He just turned and started walking toward the exit, his stride stiff and angry. "Ladies and gentlemen, Prince Harry, everyone," Greg announced to the audience as Harry retreated, leaving before we even got to the hard questions. "But I guess that's what you do when you're used to people bowing instead of challenging you." Harry stopped at the edge of the stage, turning back one last time. "You know what your problem is, Greg. You're jealous. Jealous that I've actually lived a life worth talking about while you sit here in the shadows, commenting on better people." "Better people," Greg repeated with a laugh. "If you're an example of better people, then I'm perfectly happy being average. At least I know who I am, and I'm not pretending to be something I'm not." "Go to hell," Harry muttered, just loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Already there, apparently," Greg quipped. "I'm talking to you, aren't I?" That was the final straw. Harry stormed off the stage completely, ignoring the producers trying to calm him down, ignoring the stunned looks from the crew. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the studio. Greg turned back to the camera, so straightening his tie with a calm smile. "Well, that went well," he said to the audience, who erupted in a mixture of applause and shocked laughter. "I was going to ask him about his new podcast, but I guess we'll save that for another time. If there is another time." He paused, letting the moment breathe. You know what's interesting about that whole exchange? Not once did he actually defend himself with facts or logic. It was all emotion, all grievance, all victim mentality. Sean, that's what happens when you've spent so long in an echo chamber that you forget how to have a real debate. The audience was still buzzing, people turning to each other and whispering animatedly. Look, I don't enjoy making people uncomfortable, Greg continued, though his expression suggested otherwise. But I do enjoy exposing hypocrisy. And there's no bigger hypocrite than someone who demands privacy while living publicly, who preaches tolerance while showing none, who wants equality while insisting on special treatment. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Harry came on this show thinking he could control the narrative like he does everywhere else. But here's the thing about live television. You can't edit it. You can't cut out the parts that make you look bad. You can't control how people react when they see the real you instead of the polished version. Another pause for effect. And the real Harry? He's exactly what we saw tonight. A man who's built an entire brand on being wounded, but who lashes out the moment someone questions that brand. A person who claims to want dialogue, but only on his terms. Someone who talks about moving forward, but can't stop looking backward. Greg glanced toward the exit where Harry had disappeared. He'll probably go straight to social media after this. He'll say I was rude, that I attacked him, that this is proof of everything he's been saying about the media. And his supporters will eat it up without watching the actual interview, without seeing that all I did was ask questions. Tough questions, sure, but fair questions. He turned back to face the camera directly. The truth is, Harry wants to be seen as brave for speaking his truth, but he can't handle anyone else speaking theirs. He wants to be celebrated for his honesty while being shielded from honest feedback. And that's not how the world works. That's not how any of this works. The audience applauded again, longer this time. We've got to take a quick break, Greg announced. When we come back, we'll talk about what just happened with our panel, and I'm sure they'll have some thoughts. Don't go anywhere, because this show just got a lot more interesting. As the cameras cut away and the commercial break began, Greg sat back in his chair, a satisfied look on his face. The crew members were rushing around, some looking stressed, others trying to hide their smiles. The producers were already on their phones, no doubt dealing with the fallout that was surely beginning to explode across social media. But Greg looked perfectly calm. He'd done exactly what he'd set out to do. He'd refused to play along with the usual celebrity interview game. He'd asked the questions that needed asking, pushed back where pushback was required, and didn't back down when faced with royal indignation. In the green room, staffers whispered about what they'd just witnessed. Some were worried about potential backlash, about angry phone calls from Harry's representatives, about possible legal threats. Others were energized, knowing they'd just been part of something that would be talked about for weeks, maybe months. On social media, the clips were already starting to circulate. People were taking sides, arguing in comment sections, creating memes and hot takes. Some defended Harry, calling Greg disrespectful and cruel. Others praised Greg for not treating Harry with kid gloves, for holding him accountable the way any public figure should be held accountable. But in that moment, as the commercial break continued and the studio prepared to dive into the aftermath, one thing was crystal clear. This wasn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This was a collision between two completely different worldviews. So one that believed certain people deserved deference simply because of who they were, and one that believed everyone should be subject to the same scrutiny regardless of their title or background. Greg had made his choice about which side of that line he stood on, and Harry, by storming off in a rage, had made his just as clear. The interview that was supposed to be a friendly promotional appearance had instead become a masterclass in what happens when entitlement meets accountability. When carefully managed public images collide with unscripted reality, when someone who's used to controlling every aspect of their narrative suddenly loses that control. As the commercial break ended and the cameras came back on, Greg welcomed his panelists to discuss what had just transpired. But the real story had already been written in those heated minutes of confrontation. the story of a host who refused to bow and a guest who couldn't handle being treated like everyone else.